Today's daf is daf Chav Beis, and we're up to Toshma, which is on the top of the Omud. And we're dealing with the question of Hafaras Habal. Is Hafaras Habal Oker the Neder L'Mafreya, or is it Megis Gayis, and it's only Mikan Lahaba, but the Neder was valid and binding until the time of his Hafara. Toshma, Ha'isha Shenodra bin Nazir, this is a brisa, vinitmes. So now she was a Nazira, and she came in contact with a corpse, and therefore she becomes obligated in the karbonos of a Nazir shenitma, Nazir tameh, which are three karbonos: the olas ha'of, the chatas ha'of, and the ayal li'asham. And all this is in the parsha in Naso, Perik Vav, in Sefer Bamidbar. Now, again, it's not identical to the karbonos that a person brings b'siyum nazirus, if it was nazirus b'tara, and the keves li'ola, kivsol achatos, ayol shlamim, those are the regular karbonos that are imposed upon a Nazir Tahar who completed his Nazirus or her Nazirus. But here we're talking about not about a Keves Li'ola, but rather about an Olas Ha'of. And we're not talking about a Kivsol Chatas, but rather a Chatas Ha'of. And we're not talking about an Ayel Shlavim here, we're talking about an Ayel Osham. So these are some of the differences between the two sets of karbonos. We're dealing with the karbonos of a Nazir Shenitma. Now, she became obligated in these three karbonos, but v'yachkach hefer labayla. Now the Baal was made for her Nazirus. So her Nazirus is not Chal. Would it be L'Mafreya that she never was a Nazira, or only Mikanu Lahaba from the moment that he was Mayfair? So the Brisa says, Mevia Chatas Ha'of, V'ena Mevia Olas Ha'of. So we're going to focus for a moment on Olas Ha'of. We'll come back to Chatas Ha'of in just a minute. As far as the Olas Ha'of is concerned, she cannot bring the Olas Ha'of. And the question is, why not? Isal Kedat, you're going to tell me that Baal Megis Gayis, which means that up until the moment of Hafara, her Nazirus was in fact valid and Chal, and Megis Gayis means that the Hafara only operates Mikan Lahaba. So that would mean that she violated her Nazirus by contracting Tuma. And Teisei Nami Olas Ha'of. Why doesn't she bring an Olas Ha'of? And that's the din of a Nazir Shenitma. And since at the time she contracted Tuma, she was a Nazira, in fact, therefore she's Chayav in that carbon of Olas Ha'of. And yet it says in the Brisa, Eina Mevia Olas Ha'of. It must be that the Baal is Oker the Neder L'Mafreya. And therefore, through his hafara, it becomes clear that she was never a Nazira, and therefore she never contracted Tuma. She was never Asura B'Tuma. And therefore, she doesn't bring an Olas Ha'of. So the Gemara wants to prove from this brisa that a Baal is, through his hafara, is Oker the Nazirus, Oker the Neder L'Mafreya. The Gemara says, wait a minute, you're not out in the clear. Now we go back to the part that we skipped. And the Brisa says that Mevia, she brings a Chatas Ha'of. So Elamai Me'akir Akir, you're going to say that the Baal's Hafara operates L'Mafreya, is Chatas Ha'of Nami Lo Teisei. Why does the Brisa then require of her to bring a Chatas Ha'of? The Chatas Ha'of is for violating her Nazirus, but if we're holding now that the Hafaras Habal is Oker the Nazirus L'Mafreya, and she was never a Nazira, she never violated this Isur of Tumas Nazir because she was never a Nazir to begin with. So why does the Brisa insist that she has to bring a Chatas Ha'of? And the Gemara says, you know what? The Baal is okil mafreya. And now you're asking me, why did she bring a chatas ha'of? What violation was she guilty of if the Baal's hafara was okil mafreya and she never was a Nazira, and therefore tumah is not a violation? Almani Rabbi Eliezer HaKapor, Rabbi Elazar HaKapor, this brisa should be attributed to Rabbi Elazar HaKapor, who holds that there's a chait in Kabbalas Nazirus. Kabbalas Nazirus itself inherently is a chait, as we'll soon see in the brisa. So therefore, even if we now understand that she never was a Nazira to begin with, but because of the chait of Kabbalas Nazirus, she has to bring a chatas off. The chatas is coming as a kapara for her chait of Kabbalas HaNazirus. And even though this Nazirus, Lamaisa, was not born to fruition because the Baal was okil mafreya, nevertheless, since at the moment that she accepted her Nazirus, she violated the Isur of Kabbalas Nazirus, we cannot deny, even if the Baal is okir, the Nazirus mafreya, we cannot deny that she accepted upon herself Nazirus. And therefore, for that chait of Kabbalas Nazirus, al atzma, she has to bring a korban chatas, in this case an olas ha'of. A chatas ha'of, sorry. Now, the olas ha'of is a different kind of a korban. The olas ha'of is for the actual chait of violating tumas nazir, which she cannot be guilty of because the Baal is okil mafreya. And now we're about to embark upon the brisa that formulates the shita of Rabbi Elazar HaKapor. Now, let's just review one important point over here. The Gemara assumes that if the Baal would be Megiz Gayis, then she certainly would be obligated to bring an Olas Ha'of because she has violated her Isur Tumah as an Nazira. The Baal's Hafara only operates Mikan Lahaba. And Tosas points out over here that in addition to the Olas Ha'of, she would have to bring a Keves Li Osham, like a Nazir Tameh. Because at the time that she was Nitma, she was in fact a Nazira. That's called Megiz Gayis. So Tosas points out the Gemara doesn't even mention a word here about the Keves Li Osham. It only mentions the Ola. And the reason for that is because the Osham is not mentioned in the Torah in that same pasuk in which Chatas and Ola are mentioned, but rather the next pasuk afterwards. In any event, the Rambam paskins in Perek Tes Milchas Nazirus that Baal is Megiz Gayis. And therefore he writes that if she was Nitma during her days of Nazirus, and then the Baal found out about it, that she was a Nazira and he was Mefer her, then she brings a korban tumah. And when the Rambam says she brings a korban tumah, he doesn't differentiate between this korban or another korban. It's implicit is that she brings the Osham. And now we have another sheet in Rishonim, which is attributed to the Mefaresh, that if the Baal was Mefer Ha Neder, she does not bring a korban Osham, even if Baal Megiz Gayis. And why is that? A Nazir Shenitma does not bring a korban Osham unless he has to begin his Nazirus, count his days of Nazirus, and then as a result of Tumah, Yomi Marishonim Yitlu, he has to be Mechadish his Nazirus. A korban Osham comes as a machshir so that he can now make the transition from Nazirus of Tumah to Nazirus of Tara. But here that the Baal was Mefer, she's not going to be counting any Nazirus of Tara, and therefore she does not bring a korban Osham. Okay, now we get to the brisa that records the statement of Rabbi Elazar HaKapor. The Sanya. Rabbi Elazar HaKapor Omer Ma Talmud Lomar. What is the pasuk in the parasha of Nazir Shenitma coming to teach us when it says V'chiper olav me'asher chotal nefesh? We're talking about a person who inadvertently came in contact with a corpse and contracted tumah of mess without any kavana. And the question is, what does it mean chotal nefesh? It's hard to it's hard to assume that he was a chote because it happened to be that there was a mess in the oil. He didn't know about it. And the Torah, really emphasizes the severity of the chait. Ella, says Rabbi Elazar HaKapor, what is the chait? Not the tum itself, but rather they should seer atzmo min hayayin nikra chote. The Kabbalah's Nazirus itself is a chait, because the Torah didn't require of you to accept upon yourself Nazirus, and therefore you removed yourself from the possibility of drinking yayin, and the Torah's attitude towards yayin is such that one should use yayin, obviously, properly, and for kedusha, but not to prohibit yourself from drinking wine. And B'li Neder, in a few minutes, we want to discuss the Mesilas Yesharim here, because he says that precious is one of the great midos. So why is Rabbi Elazar HaKapor, coming down hard on someone who's mitzayer atzmo by being poresh? L'chora, it says in the pasuk kedoshim to you prushim. But in any event, Rabbi Elazar HaKapor now wants to tell us that from Nazir we have a springboard. Halo dvarim kal v'chomer. Mazed, the case of a Nazir, lo tzir atzmo in a yayin. He has a limited amount of precious, and nevertheless the Torah calls him a chote, nikra chote. Hamitzayer atzmo b'chol davar. If a person flippantly takes upon himself precious from anything, halachas kam v'kam, how much more so, ein ma'asav ritzuyim v'nikra chote. So therefore the Brisa says that despite the fact that the husband was mefer and was oker hanazir l'mafreya, nevertheless she has to bring a chatos because she accepted upon herself nazirus and she was mitzaira es atzma min hayayin. Now, I asked the question of the Mesilas Yesharim. It seems from Rabbi Elazar HaKapor we should derive the conclusion that a person should not be adding upon himself isurim. It's enough that the Torah prohibited you in 365 lavin, whatever it is. So why is it that Rabbi Elazar HaKapor is teaching me that there's an avera in a person being poresh from Yoni Olam Hazeh when the Torah seems to be advocating in favor of precious? And that's going to be the Mesilas Yesharim's kasha. But first we'll mention the Rambam in Hilchos Deis Perek Gimel. The Rambam says a person should not be motzi es atzmo min ha'olam. And the Rambam says, if a man declares efrosh mehen, I'll be poresh from this world, v'lo chal basar, v'lo eshte yayin, v'lo esa isha, v'lo isha b'dirana, v'lo b'shmal b'shna. So the Rambam says, "Kayotze b'zeh kimina kohanei ovdei kochavim." This is like the priests of other religions, v'zu derech ra. But the Mesilas Yesharim explains by Arichus that there is a maila in precious. It's one of the various levels of aliyah ruchanit, of spiritual growth. And in fact, in the price of Pinchas ben Yair, we have precious as one of the steps in this ladder. So Mesilas Yesharim makes the following distinction. He says the following: B'chol davar she'eno muchach lo, in anything that he doesn't really need for his health or for serving Hashem, kagon achila meruba, gluttonous eating. Yesh mitzvah lifrosh mimenu. Then precious kicks in, as it says, kedoshim tiyu, te prushim. But elu, ashalo dai lehem b'meshe enam lokchim min ha'olam dvarim she'en muchrachim lehem, those who are not enjoying the benefit of things that they don't need, they limit themselves to the things that they need. But monim atzmam gam min hamuchrach lahem. But they rather want to take upon themselves things that they really need. So this is a very sensitive, ambiguous point in every person's life to evaluate whether he really needs something or he doesn't need something. But those who are poresh and they prevent themselves from enjoying that which they need, umiyasrim is gufa bisurim, ashalo chafetz b'hem Hashem klal zui precious ra'a v'uderech hasichlim. V'al precious kazu omer abulozar kapor shenikra chote. You may recall that we spoke about a Nazir echad bin Adoram, who was the paradigm of a Nazir Lishma. He realized that the Yetzer Hara was getting the best of him, and that's why he wanted to cut his hair as a Nazir. Toshma, the Gemara wants to bring a proof now to the opposite conclusion, that a Baal is Megis Gaius, it's only a Mikan Lahava. This Sanya, we learned Behedja. In a Braisa, Ha'isha, Shenodra bin Nazir, Vishama Chaver Tov Yomer Avani, Uba Baila Shel Harishona Veheferla, Hi Muteres V'Chaverta Asura. Now, the second woman, we'll call her Leah, when she heard Rachel accepting upon herself Nazirus, and Leah said, Ve'ani, she was being matfis herself in Rachel. And now the Baal is Mefer, the neder of Rachel, which means that the neder of Rachel falls apart, it collapses. And if we assume that the Baal is Mefer Nedarim of his wife, Lemafreya, how can we justify the Chaverta Asura? She was matfis her Nazirus on Rachel. Rachel was never a Nazira. Shma mina Baal Megis guys. The only way we can explain this price is if we assume that the Baal is only Mefer Mikan Ulahaba, and therefore Chaverta Asura, because when she said Va'ani at that point in time, at that moment, the Nazirus of Rachel was a valid binding Nazirus. But if you're going to say that the Baal is Oken the Nazirus Lemafreya, then now that it becomes clear that the Nazirus of Rachel never got off the ground, it was retroactively uprooted, then if she was never a Nazira, then the Hatfasa of Leah could not be Chal. And this seems to be the final conclusion of the Gemara, and we're going to paskin that a Baal is Megis Gaius. The only problem is that earlier in the sugya, back on Daf Chof Aleph, the Gemara quoted a brisa and proven from that brisa that the Baal is Oker Miaker Akar. He's Oker, his wife's neder is Nazirus Lemafreya. And that's why in Nazirus Shenitma, and the Baal was made for Nedarim, she doesn't bring the Karbanos of Tuma. She brings a Chatos based on the Kabbalah's Nazirus, which itself is an Aver according to Rabbi Elazar HaKaplan. So at the end of the day, we really have a machlokas between two brisos. One brisa clearly indicates that the Baal is Okel Mafreya, and therefore she doesn't bring her Karbanos of Nazirus Tuma, because if she was Megis Guy, she would bring the Karbanos of Tuma, except maybe not the Osham, that was an issue. Whereas this brisa clearly indicates that a Baal is Megis Gaius and not Lemafreya. So we really have in effect a machlokas here, a stira between two brisos. So Tosa says that the earlier brisa reflects the shita of Rabbi Elazar HaKafar, but the Chachamim never accepted Rabbi Elazar HaKafar. They hold that the Kabbalah's Nazirus is not the Chet, but rather the Kiyum HaNazirus. Nazirus itself will fall when she's really a Nazira. And the Chachamim would hold that Baal is Megis Gaius. But it really seems clearly from the Tosas that the final maskota is Megis Gaius, and that's the Rosh. The Rosh writes that this brisa that we're learning now is the final conclusion of the Gemara, and the Rosh says that the Gemara actually retracts its original proof from the first brisa that Baal is Okel Mafreya, And we could say that a Baal is make his gayis, rak mikana lahaba, and the reason she doesn't bring an olasa off is because the chiyuv korbanos of a Nazir shenitma only applies when he will begin again his Naziris of Tara, as we said before about an Asham, so to the Olas of Machshir. And the Rambam, which I'm looking for here for some reason now, it eludes me, but the Rambam paskins Megiz guys. Just give me a second. I want to see if I can find the Rambam here. Okay, I don't want to hold it up here. It's a very long footnote here in the Masechet, but in this long footnote, I'm pretty sure that he quotes the Rambam. Lemaskona Baal Megiz guys, like this raya from this last price. Now the Gemara, quotes a brisa. Rabbi Shimon Omer. Rabbi Shimon is going to add something to the Tanakama. We learned in the brisa that if the Baal comes and he's mefer the neder of Rachel, then Rachel is no longer Nazira. Her friend Leah's matvis is Asura. Says Rabbi Shimon, Im Omrullah Harenik Mosech Shtein Mutaros. And Rabbi Shimon is differentiating between two statements of Leah. One statement was Vani, and that's a full-fledged Hatfasa, which means that in the case of Hani, if we hold Baal Megiz Gayas, then the second Nazirus would be Chal. But if instead of saying Vani, she declares Harenik Mosech, she means something else. That's not just Atfasa. But Harenik Mosech implies that I want to be like her, straight across the board. Bechol Inyan. In other words, Leah, is making a Tanai when she says Harenik Mosech, that if at the end of the day, Rachel will be Muteres, no matter for what reason, then my Nazir should not be Chal at all. And therefore she includes even a situation where her Nazirs will be terminated post Har Kabbalah, meaning if Rachel's Nazirs will terminate with Baal Megiz Gayis, then Leah doesn't want to be a Nazira at all. That's the comment here of Rabbi Shimon.